The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the Hot Grill Summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai. Hello and welcome. It's great to see you all here. This is the second date on our world tour. The first was in October last year in Tauranga. Just easing into it. Life on the road, it's pretty tough. My name is Toby Manhire.
Kia ora, ko Annabelle le mai the tōku ingoa.
My name is Ben Thomas. I was labelled a popular pundit by the New Zealand Herald in 2022.
And I don't know, we invited all of the bad boys of Brexit, spiritual leaders to come and join us, but nothing so far. We'll see. We'll just keep a mysterious eye on that seat. You never know what might happen. I love this festival. It's so good to be at this festival. I've had so many great experiences at this festival. I've also had one experience where I moderated a panel with cartoonists on it, and one of the cartoonists on the panel literally fell asleep during the session. So I'm hoping we can go up a notch on that this time. I'm not promising. We'll see how we go. Let's crack into it. We'll try and have some time for some questions at the end too. So if you've got any interesting questions, love to percolate on those. Today is August the 20th.
Tauranga popular one was, who are you? and what is a podcast?
We've been working on the answers to that in the interim. There's one sitting week to go, as many of you will know, until the election campaign starts properly, but we're already in it, really. There's 48 days till election day, 36 days till advance voting begins. I always have to get my maths right on this. I struggle, but I think I've got those right. Because it's a literary festival, a word festival, a books festival, let's start with a bookie question. One of the traditions of New Zealand elections that I love is after each election, Stephen Levine convenes a conference at Parliament, and then a book comes out the following year. I think it's been going back since about the 70s. They're always given sort of one-line, strapline titles. 1996, Campaign to Coalition. 2008 was Key to Victory. 2017 was Stardust and Substance. Annabelle, looking now, if you were going to put a title on the election of 2023, what do you reckon it would be?
Can I have two?
Yes, of course.
One for the left and one for the right.
Okay.
For the right, my one's going to be Rinky Dinky Days.
Okay.
Because it feels nice on my face when I say it. And for the left, it's going to be Bread and Buggered.
Bread and Buggered.
Because that's probably the worst swear word I can say in front of a live audience. So getting it out now.
Normally, quite often when we record these podcasts in the studio, there's bits where we go, take that out, Te Ahi, you got to cut that out. It's harder to do in a live venue, isn't it? Ben, what's the title you're going to put on the book?
I was thinking like 2.5 Men, but then I realised that's not in keeping with them. Like normally it's normally some sort of like Stardust. What is it?
Stardust and Substance.
Stardust and Substance. Yeah. This is a kind of childlike, sort of punny or alliterative sort of thing. So I thought if it turns out to just be a major party kind of confrontation, it'll be brilliantly basic, the bread and butter bonfire.
Beautiful.
If the smaller parties end up playing more of a role it'll just be the same thing, because I can't come up with too many ideas, but
Yeah.
Brilliantly basic, bombing bureaucracy, bathroom bans, and the bread and butter bonfire. Which makes it sound like a Roald Dahl book.
And you haven't even got beetroot and boondoggles in there.
No, God damn.
So left to go. Hey, one of the most striking things about this campaign, if we look at the poll for One News that came out last week, is that people don't seem really enamoured with either of the main parties. The purple vote, as it's called, the blue and the red, combined 66% in the last poll. And you have to go back to 2002 to see anything like that, where the top two parties were as unpopular. What's going on there, Ben, do you think? I mean, is it just a factor of MMP? Is it the malaise of the nation? There's a line that was once used about Harold Wilson, to borrow that. Are Chris and Chris travelling up and down the country stirring up apathy?
I mean, it's an iterative function of what's been happening, right? Which is that, because of the external factors, high cost of living, inflation, crime, all these sorts of things that just generally tend towards, the kind of national malaise that a lot of people are talking about. National with its new and dynamic leader, Christopher Luxon, back in late 2021, fixed on basically, what's known as the small target strategy. So have as few distractions, let people just think about how bad their lives are, associate that with the current government, and then you just sort of wait until you become government yourself in the election. About January this year, Labor had the same idea. So we now have two candidates who are essentially running presidential style elections.
The incredible shrinking Chris's.
Based on not being Jacinda Ardern and being a cleavage or a break from the last 5 years of Labor government. First we saw that with the alliterative bonfire, and then we've seen sort of tax relief in a kind of Labor way, which is you get these tax credits, and working for families, which are essentially just subsidies, but they call them tax credits, and that will be matched up against, however National delivers its tax policy soon. But basically, the median voter theory, which is that, all voters in terms of their political extremism are sort of on a bell curve, and in MMP you've got to control the middle point. It's basically just these two parties heading towards each other like sort of game of kind of chicken in the desert, about to crash at the point of the median voter. And so the policies are converging. So if you think about it as two separate parties, you're like, well, this is historically low support. If you think of it as one broad set of policies that is supported by almost 70% of New Zealanders, it's pretty popular.
Although, if you look at in the preferred Prime Minister rankings, Chris Hipkins, on that last poll, 21%. Christopher Luxon, 20%. Annabelle, that's 41%. I mean, that's 6 out of 10 New Zealanders who are like, no, thank you.
I think that New Zealanders have never really felt a particularly strong affinity for Christopher Luxon. Like, he's never ridden a wave of personal popularity. So I think that's why he's polling where he is. And in terms of Chris Luxon, I think that people are just ho-ha with the government, ho-ha with Luxon's ministers, and he's kind of carrying the can for that. And there's no one else is sort of capturing the imagination of New Zealanders. And I'm not even sure that New Zealanders really know at this point what they want from their next leader. Yeah. But in terms of, where the parties are polling, it's so low that literally Labor and National would struggle to form a coalition with each other on the numbers that they've got. But they probably have more in common with each other than they do with their natural coalition partners, ironically.
In terms of the way that the potential coalitions might work, just half an hour ago, Chris Hipkins gave a speech, I think, at Parliament, which was teed up as a major announcement. It was being teased to the media in that fashion. And it was Chris Hipkins laying out who he wouldn't work with. And he said, after a long preface, he said, I will not work with New Zealand First, which is kind of like New Zealand First already said they wouldn't. What did you make of that, Annabelle? Is that I mean, presumably the tactic is to go, they're a coalition of chaos also, to align, hopefully try and attached to Luxon, the National Party, a sort of more fringe, potentially conspiracy-aligned grouping. Is that a smart strategy, do you think?
Well, can I start by saying that, I think it's great that Labour have taken a stand on speaking out about transphobia and those sorts of issues. Really important and heartening to see. But when I listen to snippets of today's announcement, I can't help but feel that the only person who will benefit from it is Winston Peters. Last week, Hipkins described himself as the underdog. Today, he gave that title back to Winston Peters, who can now rail against Labour and National and ACT. And I think today has blown fresh wind in his sails.
Yeah.
So it's hard to understand the logic of it, just to have being able to say, coalition of chaos doesn't seem worth it to me.
What do you think? And do you think it underlines that Christopher Luxon might have missed a trick in not ruling out New Zealand First himself months, weeks?
I think in business, in takeovers, there's a thing called the poison pill, where if your company is going to be sort of taken over, you just sort of make it impossible, essentially, and for the aggressor, and they kind of start choking on their takeover effort.
Yeah.
And so I think this is sort of Hipkins' kind of version of a poison pill. Luxon has been at pains, without actually ruling out New Zealand First, he's been at pains to sort of almost kind of pretend they don't exist, like we're taught to deal with, nightmares or fears, or, you kind of just put it out of your mind and hopefully it sort of shrinks in relevance and stops being a factor. And this has been the centre-right's approach to New Zealand First so far in the campaign. But Hipkins is out there he's essentially saying Winston's own pitch, which is, if you want to change the government, vote for New Zealand First. And he's saying to Christopher Luxon, if you want to be in government, best wishes. Here's Shane Jones. Take some people that they scrounged up from the Taumarunui RSA for your trouble. Here's an insane ex-Shortland street actor who's not even the good one who believes in the pyramid conspiracies. He's just a COVID nutcase, And so, I think that's, it's actually pretty savvy of Labour to do that. It was obviously not news that they wouldn't be working with New Zealand First anyway. But I think it does put pressure on Luxon, and I think they may have missed an opportunity to have ruled out Peters.
It's interesting though, because there's been this massive policy shift within New Zealand First that we haven't really talked about, which is that, forever Winston Peters has said that, it's up to New Zealanders and voters to decide who gets to be in government and who will form coalitions with who. And whenever he's been asked before an election, who will you work with, who won't you work with, who will you rule out, who won't you rule out, he's always been very vehement about that. So to suddenly be saying that he won't work with Labour is quite unusual, and it'd be nice to see him questioned a bit more about that. Why the change of heart?
Well, Winston Peters he is, like, love him or hate him, Winston Peters is the innovator of New Zealand MMP politics, right? He is constantly coming up with new governing arrangements. He was the first person to be in a coalition government. He was the first person to be in what became the new sort of style of, support parties who claimed to be sort of not quite in government or not quite in coalition. And then he sort of innovated again with the arrangement that he made with the Greens and Labour in 2020. And sort of the corollary of that is he's always coming up with different ways to subvert his electoral promises before the votes are in. In 1996, he said, vote for Winston Peters if you want to change the government and get National out. And he later, when he was questioned why he went into coalition with National, he said, we did change it to a National New Zealand First government. Then in 2005, he said that he wouldn't go into government with anyone because they would reject the baubles of office. A few weeks later, when he was moving into the Minister of Foreign Affairs office, he was questioned about that, and he said, you idiots. If you look at the dictionary definition of baubles, it means a worthless thing or a trinket, and this is great. So I expect that we'll see some more sort of O. Henry, selling your hair to buy a hairbrush or whatever, fob watch kind of reversals of fortune after the election if he's in a position to have sort of negotiating sway.
We know in MMP that it is the party vote that counts, that's what the composition of Parliament is determined on, but it's always fun and interesting to look at the electorate battles too. And I think there's some quite tasty ones in this election campaign. Annabelle, what are you watching closely in the electorates?
The one that I'm most fascinated by is Ikaroa Rāwhiti, and Mihi Ngārangi and I have just spent a few weeks driving through the electorate from Hicks Bay in the north all the way down to Wainui o Mata in the south. Even though we're completely fascinated by it, probably about 60% of people that we talk to don't even know who's running.
Yeah.
But it is a fascinating match-up between Meka and Kushla Tangaire Manuel, who is quite a remarkable candidate that Labour were able to, rustle up at the last minute. I think it's going to be a real knife's edge of a race, that one. But also, only 67% of eligible voters turned out last election to vote in Ikaroa Rāwhiti, the second lowest of the Māori seats. So how those two reach into those electorates to capture the hearts and minds of people is also something that I'm fascinated by.
Do you have a sense of, because obviously Meka Whaitiri defected from one party to another some months ago while Chris Hipkins was in London. Do you have a sense of when talking to people, of the attachment to Meka Whaitiri as the MP of a few terms now, or to Labour, the Parakura, that's his seat from way back? Do you have a sense of whether it's going to be close, or whether the affection remains with Meka?
I think, in parts of the electorate there's very strong support for Meka, particularly around Te Mataua Maui, Hastings, Flaxmere, Napier, where she whakapapas to, being from Ngāti Kahungunu. I think in general there's a sense of abandonment in the electorate. They're grappling with some huge issues post the cyclone, and there was a number of people that we spoke to who said they feel like politicians roll in a high-vis and steel cap boots, have their photos taken and then truck out again. So I think, ultimately the race will be decided in the more populated urban centres like Wainui o Mata, those sorts of places, and I think it's just too close to call, I think.
And really hard to poll, though. You've polled those seats before
incredibly,
for because it's
incredibly
so
hard
dispersed,
to poll. Yeah.
Ben, what's squealing your wheels as far as electorate battles are concerned?
I'm interested in a few of the bellwether seats in Auckland that haven't sort of been remarked on. The electorate contests are actually really interesting this year. Normally I don't pay a lot of attention. It's more sort of pre-MMP kind of nerds who, think that we're in sort of, US congressional districts or something and want to get really involved in these one-on-one matchups, because under MMP, traditionally, they don't matter that much, except as, getting parties into Parliament if they're under 5%. But here, there's quite a significant role for them to play in terms of the compositions of the lists and the caucuses for Labour and National. Because Labour won so many seats last time, many of them against the grain, places like Rangitata, they would never have expected. A lot of those Labour, ministers currently, are only in there if people further down lose their electorates. Conversely, in National, a lot of the sort of quote-unquote, more diverse caucus that was produced on the list will only come in if people further up, the legions of white men sort of fail to win back National electorates.
Could be a really small number of National could do really well and still bring a tiny number of list candidates.
Still bring a very small number of list
candidates. Get an overhang, wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, that's right.
Old school.
And so I think a couple to look at in that respect, Northcote, Shannon Halbert. Yeah, he's been a pretty good MP, good guy. Won reasonably convincingly last time, but Northcote has tended to go with the biggest party, not necessarily the government, but the biggest party. Another one is Maunga Kiakea, it used to be seen as quite a safe Labour seat, but again, in recent years, it has just gone with the party that's had the highest party vote. The other thing to look at, National is probably looking at a bigger swing back in electorates than they are in the, overall. We've talked about National still doing relatively poorly in terms of the party vote, but because electorates are more sort of one-on-one, they'll tend to overperform when they're sort of looking at taking back electorates versus the party vote as a whole. So, and then the third sort of marginal kind of toss-up could go in either way sort of seat that I'm interested in is one that National traditionally holds by about 20,000 votes, which is Tamaki, in the sort of the eastern bays of Auckland, which is where Simon O'Connor, who's been there since about 2011, is under threat from a former colleague of mine, Brooke Van Velden, who's now the deputy leader of ACT. And normally you would sort of say, well, that's a cinch for him. He's been, I think in the last election, where Labour still won Labour somehow won the party vote in Tamaki because of the COVID response. O'Connor was still, I think, 8,000 votes ahead of the Labour candidate. What seems to have happened is that some national people, Active obviously been on the rise, but some within National, there was a challenge for the candidacy against O'Connor within National itself, which he staved off. He's got good control of his electorate organisation, but there are a lot of National members around that area who don't really kind of support his outspoken stances on basically social stances, socially conservative stances. Yeah. He gets into trouble by being a bit effusive on social media about things like developments in American abortion law.
Yes. He was asked to take down a Facebook post in which he welcomed.
And it's not the first one. He and look, O'Connor, he's a conviction politician. He and Lewis Wall were, two MPs in the previous parliament who were, very vocal about human rights abuses in China. He's a very good local MP, but there are certainly people within the party who don't want those kind of views sort of to be represented in Tamaki. Matthew Hooton, another former colleague of mine and Brooks, claimed that there was internal polling done by ACT which showed them neck and neck. That there were sort of whispers that you hear coming out of it. Some National people are sort of already kind of, looking at looking at letting the electorate go. So it'll be interesting to see.
I know women on the left in that electorate too who would ordinarily never consider voting for ACT in their wildest dreams, but are this time just to get rid of Simon. But also apparently Brooke is running a really smart campaign there, lots of street meetings and really active in the community.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, the way that ACT's confidence has grown over this term where they performed so extraordinarily well, defied a gravity where you normally expect that any party that goes from one MP to how many is it? 10?
10.
That you will get some kind of really seismic scandals and kind of hilarious pratfalls, but there's been relatively little of that. However, in the last week, it's been interesting. Well, there has been, but there were candidates that either quit or apologised after historic remarks that conspiracy aligned. There was David Seymour doubling, tripling down on his hilarious joke about his Guy Fawkes fantasy, just asking questions in the House, bringing it back into Oxygen, and then most recently, starting a fight with the family of Nelson Mandela, which seems like spectacularly ill-advised.
But look, this is sort of the thing, right? If things are going well for you, they have had very good caucus discipline for the last 3 years, by far the best of any parliamentary party. Like you said, their confidence has increased. They've had a number of, high-profile celebrity endorsements, including the spectral presence of the first president of the Free South Africa. Also the ancient spirits of the chiefs who signed the treaty. That's right. Channeled via ACT public meetings.
David Seymour gets in charge of the history curriculum. It's going to be amazing.
It's and the thing is, It's probably a lot like, I think we were saying before, it's probably a lot like doing a podcast. You know, you sort of become a bit more comfortable, and then you start saying some things, and you start shooting your mouth off, and then you remember people are listening. and so, like, you know, when you're surrounded by the faithful in an ACT meeting, you know, it plays really well, you know, because he knows he's being cheeky, he knows he's being provocative. Oh, of course, Nelson Mandela would be campaigning for ACT, you know, and then it gets reported, and then, you know, it turns into this sort of, you know, everything goes through this slightly more po-faced process of news media reporting. You know, fair enough. And the same thing with, you know, the joke he shouldn't have made, obviously, because, you know, one, not very funny, two, you know, temperatures are a bit high. And it can cause a sort of distraction because, you know, I was actually interested that he was asking questions in Parliament about, you know, the joke, you know, like a sort of Milan Kundera story, like that he did want to return to it because I think they probably felt that played well with their supporters, that their supporters were like, oh, it is just a joke, it's, you know. But
we're not allowed to tell jokes anymore.
But yeah, you're not allowed to tell jokes anymore. Yeah. You know, we're bringing, you know, you're allowed to be funny again under an ACT government or something.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I think they might have underestimated just how much of a distraction it turns into, and how off course it can sort of blow things, because then it, you know, it brings National into it. They don't want any part of this, you know. And so I think, you know, yeah, a bit of a wake-up call for them.
I was going to mention, as far as electorate battles that are interesting, Wellington Central, which is my place I first voted and was a interesting first MMP seat with Richard Prebble winning, and that was sort of immortalised in that the Tony Sartorius film campaign. And then there's been a Labour seat, and Grant Robertson's held it for some time now, maybe since 2008, I think. And now he's stood away. So is James Shaw. We've got Nicola Willis, who was there last time, is now standing on a Haria. So we've got this really interesting new field of including Tamitha Paul for the Greens, who is trying to kind of channel. She's close to Chloe Swarbrick, trying to channel the energy from Auckland Central, but also some of the Tory whānau winning the mayoralty there.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the hot grill summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
But I'm conscious as well that we've come to Otatahi, we've come to Christchurch and not talked anything about Christchurch seats. And that seems suboptimal. So I thought I thought to remedy that, we should try and get someone on the stage who knows a lot about Christchurch politics, ideally someone who has represented a Christchurch constituency across 8 terms. And if possible, I don't know if there's anyone in the audience who fits this, someone who has also been Mayor of Christchurch for 3 terms. Is there anybody here? Oh, it's Lianne Dalziel! Oh, what a wonderful ovation. Welcome, Lianne. So great to have you with us. You've just come back from being away for a bit overseas.
Yeah, I've been overseas for 3 months. It's been the longest holiday I've ever had in my entire life.
Good on you.
Bit of an OE.
Yeah. I forgot to do it when I was young.
What does it look like, New Zealand politics, when you return to it with a fresh eye?
Well, because I've been invited to be with you today, I've had to do a bit of research. Because
that was spontaneous. That wasn't planned.
Well, that's why I'm all mic'd up. It was. It's been. I've had to really catch up with things because a lot has changed in 3 months. There's been a lot going on. Various things have happened, and All of it has played into these poll results, and I've always felt poll results were quite interesting for the trends that they identify, and at the moment it's a little bit all over the place.
Yeah.
And what are the electorate battles in Christchurch, the state of the races in Christchurch that sticks out to you that you're interested in?
Well, I think that the one that stands out is Ilam, but I'll come back to that.
Okay.
But I think that, I've represented both Christchurch Central and Christchurch East, and I've been a list MP. So, and I think they tell some stories. So Christchurch Central and Christchurch East, and actually, I'll perhaps turn it around the other way, the list MPs. We're going to end up with 8 or 9 list MPs in Christchurch after this election. And that will be, I think, a first for the extent of the list MPs. In terms of, so it makes the electoral races less interesting because various people who are running for seats, they're high enough up on their party list to win a list position if they don't win the seat. The one exception is Ilam, because Ilam has 3 candidates running who have no chance of becoming an MP unless they win the seat.
Right.
And so they are obviously Hamish Campbell for the National Party, the incumbent Sarah Pallett for the Labour Party, and Raf Manji for the Opportunities Party. And the difference with this one is that if the Opportunities Party, if Raf Manji wins the seat, then actually the Opportunities Party becomes a parliamentary party for the first time. So that's what makes it really, really interesting.
You think that's a chance?
I think anything's a chance. What I find extraordinary about Ilam is that the person who lost the safest national seat ever has been guaranteed a free ride back into Parliament at the list position of 14.
At this point, we'd like to welcome on the stage Jerry Brownlee.
Lianne, I was curious to know, do you think Labour has a chance of winning the election and forming another government? And if so, how could they do it?
Well, yes, I do think that they can. And I think that because I've run for public office over so many years, I was reflecting on the 2005 election campaign. And it is personally very memorable because that was the election campaign that enabled me to quit smoking forever. I needed to have a stressful moment so that I could never use stress as an excuse for taking up smoking again. And I have to say that was the most stressful election campaign I have ever run in. It was misogynist, it was racist, it was nasty, and it was the first time ever that I stood on street corners having meetings, which was always the way that I ran campaigns. It was the first time where people said, "What's in it for me?" And I remember this Labour stalwart standing there, an older woman, who I'd known for many, many years. She turned round to the person who asked that question and she said, "We do not ask that." But it became really common that people were saying, "What's in it for me?" instead of "What's in it for us?" What's in it for the nation? What's in it for our environment? What's in it for, a more equitable society?
So I've just got a follow-up question. What do you think of Labour's slogan this year?
Which is, of course, in it for you, which I guess the ambiguity is whether it's a singular or a plural you, isn't it, Lianne?
I would like to plead the fifth. I'm a life member of the Labour Party and want to remain so.
How is that when you look back to the 2005 campaign, or maybe the political milieu generally then, and compare it to to how politics are today? Is there anything that sticks out in terms of...
It's interesting that you say that because, if you think back, I often say to people, I was a cabinet minister for 4 years before Facebook started. The 2005 election was before the iPhone was invented. So everything now is exponentially more accessible, more amenable to misinformation and disinformation. So now there is a mechanism for undermining people's personal sense of confidence and security and safety online. And so all of these things factor into what is a very, very different environment.
You were, I think in the last few days, up in Wellington at a valedictory speech for...
Yes, I went up for two reasons. I went up for a former colleague, Graham Kelly, who's written a book. I can't remember the name of it now. He's going to kill me for that. It's a very interesting book about...
There's a good review on Newsroom.
His time in Parliament. But it was Graham was there in the 80s and was really almost an opposition MP in government. And then I went to Poto Williams's valedictory. So she was the Member of Parliament who took over from me when I stood down to become the Mayor of Christchurch. And I have to say it was an extraordinary valedictory. It was humorous and poignant and really respectful of the people that she'd had the privilege of representing over the 10 years, I think, that she was their MP.
Such an interesting example of political oratory or theatre or whatever, the valedictory, because she did manage to get a few little jabs in there.
She did.
But it didn't seem like she was going hard out, settling any scores or anything,
No.
and it had you were talking recently, Annabelle, about the Todd Muller valedictory. Tell us about that.
I found his valedictory incredibly moving. He talked about, how divided, how polarised Aotearoa has become recently in terms of our views of the place of the treaty and, Māori. And it was a really powerful kōrero. He talked about, how dangerous it is when the centre collapses. The centre is essentially the po of our whare, and it's about bringing in the sides to gently shift our mindset and our beliefs and our values. And he also spoke very powerfully about climate change as well, and not being able to hold the gaze of our rangatahi when they ask us what they've done about the climate. And it just made me think, in terms of conservative New Zealand, he's the leader that they need right now, and it's such a shame they don't have him. The other thing, just in terms of valedictories in general, is that there is something so special that touches my heart every time I hear a waiata Māori start in Parliament, and it fills me with such hope for what we could be as a multicultural, treaty-centred nation, and every time I hear it fills my heart.
Was it Jan Logie that went out to the Waiata 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton?
Yes. I love that, didn't she?
Yeah, I think
That's so cool.
But it's a common thread in lots of the valedictories that people look back thoughtfully. I mean, Ian McKelvey, who's someone who's, I think, liked across the House, was very big on this, Todd Muller as well. Collegiality, certain issues that unite us, we need to move beyond the petty politics of tum to tum to tum to tum to tum. Do you think is there part of you that goes, that's all very well, but why weren't you doing it when you were in a position of power?
Yeah. I think that, somebody like Muller, and certainly somebody like McKelvey, McKelvey was never a tribalist warrior. Most of people have probably never heard of him. Things like the Muller thing are interesting because, Muller is a very reflective, articulate guy. He's obviously overcome some very real challenges in his own life recently. Stemming from that sort of maybe misplaced ambition. But, there is a sort of, it's not a bum note, but he's talked about the importance of not kicking the can down the road in terms of climate change. He did make a real contribution. He worked on the Zero Carbon Act with James Shaw, and made sure that National supported that. But then, if you think about it, he could have been the Minister for Climate Change in a new national government.
Most likely would have.
They're unlikely to give it to ACT. And so, as somebody who helped create the Act, who really evangelises for it, he could have ensured that, but instead he's leaving. Now, there's genuine reasons that he's leaving. He's learned his own limitations, but at the same time, there is something a bit sort of, it's not quite as resounding and resonant if you leave kind of going like, I implore you all to be better. Also, I'm just going to take a comfortable retirement. So, but you get that. I mean, the valedictory that stood out to me the most was Stuart Nash. The one that stood out immediately was Opito Williams-Seo, but
that was so cool.
Outstanding.
He was in full Samoan
that's
traditional dress.
And people like me, we like to see representation as well. So
Kia ora.
He was top. He's a full figure.
He was providing very positive body image. But Nash's was really good, and first of all, he did it in a very good. He wove a kind of narrative of anecdotes and funny stories. It's very engaging. That one by one, sort of almost like a kind of like Chaucer's, like Pilgrim's Progress or something. One by one, kind of ticked off all of the things that he was eventually fired for as actually being okay. He sort of said, when if you share a few emails about what happened in cabinet with donors who've always been your great mates, who've always just supported you because you're good friends, but what really stood out to me from that was that everyone was his great mate. And I think it betrayed something about the kind of psychology of people who go into politics sometimes, where he was like, all these people, all these property millionaires who backed my campaign, such good friends over the years. All of these officials who called me minister and gave me nice bread, my good friends. And so sometimes I wish that I could go through life sort of as politicians see it.
You've got to get your timing right in Parliament, because how sucky is it that when you lose, you don't get to go back and do a valedictorian if you lose your seat in the election?
Michael Woodhouse as well, who can get in. He's not getting to give a valedictory, and he's going to be campaigning in Dunedin. He's out of there, and we can get into that. The other valedictories that were interesting, I thought, one was Emily Henderson, MP for Whangarei, who in her valedictory revealed that she had absolutely no expectation of becoming an MP at all, which tells you something about the size of that red wave that ripped through in 2020. And the other one that can't go without mentioning is Jamie Strange, who
aptly named.
lived so up to his name. You cannot imagine. He literally spent 3 of his 15 minutes delivering in spoken word the full version of the New Zealand national anthem.
Get it on the record.
It was incredible. Do you remember your valedictory, Lianne?
I remember it very well.
Tell us a little bit about it. Recite it to us, including the national anthem. Was it a special moment?
Look, a valedictory is a special moment because, one, you get to reflect on the time that you've been there, and I was there for a very long time. But I remember when I quoted my maiden speech, because you always go back to what you said when you came.
They're the bookends.
They are the bookends. And I remember saying that I told a silly story about how I'd been treated by a group of people when I was a tea lady at the hospital. And the way that people don't see people because of the position that they hold. So I said I wanted to be the face of the people that couldn't be seen and the voice of the people that couldn't be heard. So it's lofty ambition. But I sort of ended my valedictory with a reflection that for a magic moment in time, I felt on the silt-sodden streets of East Christchurch, I felt that I had done what I came to Parliament to do. So, it is a very, it's an important part of that ending of your time there. And I do feel for those that can't give a valedictory because they lose their seats.
We'll go to questions very shortly. So if we'll ask for mics and hands to be raised in a moment. But I wanted to ask you, Lianne, as we have you here, and you're one of the few people who has experience in cabinet and central government, high-level central government. You have experience in local government as a mayor of a major city, and it's been a theme that's been bubbling away for a while now, that relationship between those two forms of government, and whether it's in Three Waters prominently, and infrastructure more broadly, climate adaptation now. What is your read on the relationship, the dynamic between central government and local government?
Well, having served as a mayor under both National and Labour governments, I can say categorically that neither government understands the relationship that could be on offer through true partnership with local government. For over and over and over again, local government gets overlooked by central government. Central government come in and take over from local government when it suits them to. And unfortunately, what that does is that it actually undermines people's faith in local government because they see central government taking over. So I think that if we operated more in this country as a partnership between central government and local government, and that we resolved some of the outstanding funding issues that have been an issue for a very, very long time, I think that we could actually improve the way that we take on the challenges that are going to come with climate change and all of those other issues that are going to be requiring of that very local and proximate relationship with the people of New Zealand.
Kia ora. Here.
All right, now we have microphones from our friends here. Throw your arm in the air if you have a question. There's one down the front here. Please wait till you get the microphone because we're going to record this and you'll be forever memorialised on the podcast stream of Gone by Lunchtime. Hello. Oh, let us know who your question is for as well.
This question's for everybody. My question is, if you were charged with coming up with a bingo card for the 2023 election, what would be a square that you would come up with? Like an example could be like Top taking TVNZ to court because they got left out of a debate or something like that.
Well, an easy one, so I'll go first while the others are thinking something up, is Christopher Luxon saying what I would say is, which is his thing.
My one is Shane Jones being charged under the Digital Harm Act for the quality of his singing on his viral video.
That TikTok video, if you haven't seen it, is
truly
really
horrific.
Something else.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That's a great question. When I worked in Parliament, we used to do like kind of drinking games, with like the documentary of the Hollow Men, or like, and spend a lot of time on that sort of thing. So I suspect that we won't have any new ones. I think it's all stuff that we've heard before, except maybe if we're 3 weeks out from the election, Labour on 25%, then I think put free dental care in there.
Kia ora koutou. There's been a rumour floating around the last week or so that National hasn't done a carbon estimate on their transport plan. How on earth does something like that happen in 2023 when climate change is such a big focus in this election?
Good question. National's response to that, as best I understand, is we don't have the officials to model it.
It's not a rumour. they haven't done this sort of the carbon impacts, but neither of the government, right, on their national policy statement. Even though I think there's some kind of, didn't James Shaw introduce some kind of policy that large cabinet initiatives should have some sort of emissions estimate?
Yep.
When the national policy statement for transport, which was announced by the new Transport Minister, David Parker, was announced a couple of weeks ago, he said that at Cabinet he had said, when there's more detail about these particular projects, like when they actually come to market, that's when we'll do the assessment. National just haven't done one. Presumably they'll do the same kind of thing when they're in government, if that policy is still going. And I mean, the way that it happens is just, it's the way that climate change policy always happens in New Zealand, which is that in 2008, right? I'm very old. 2008, that was a climate change election. The GFC was happening, but that was the year the ETS came in. Helen Clark was promising that we'd have carbon neutral New Zealand by 2050. John Key was saying we'd have halved our emissions by 2030 if a national government was elected. If you went into a coma during that election campaign and you were revived today, you would be pretty excited to see what progress we had made. But, look, other things come up, cost of living, and those things drive any kind of radical climate change action down the agenda. It's not a great story, but it's the one that's right.
And we haven't mentioned the Greens during this conversation much at all. They seem to be playing a reasonably successful campaign strategy, they've had another policy announcement today, just put out their tax policy early on and just being available to any disaffected Labour voters mostly, right?
Yeah, it feels like a slow and steady wins the race approach from them, just quietly putting out good policy and speaking to it and not having any candidates with weird and wacky social media backgrounds.
There's still time. There
should be two list MPs for the Greens here in Christchurch after the election.
Yeah.
So Lianne Farm, who was on the Environment Canterbury over the last few years, she's been outstanding, and I think there's been a lot of warmth at her being placed. I think it's number 6 on the Greens list, and Kahurangi Carter sitting at 14. So that'll be, she might be in there as well. And I think it's been quite interesting to see the way that the Greens have really, I think, they went through a bumpy patch and they've now settled down and determined to play a role.
Kia ora. Given the similarity and the convergence in policy between the two major parties, do you ever see a future of a European-style grand coalition in New Zealand between Labour and National?
I can't see it in practical terms, but...
No.
I think we're too tribal for that in New Zealand in terms of our politics.
It would take, I don't think it's inconceivable in wartime, for example, like if there was some, and arguably maybe, a pandemic, if things had worked out differently, who knows, but I can't, it's a bit like the question as well of why aren't we getting a teal, Opportunist Party are pushing teal hard as an idea, but in Australia there were these teal candidates, and why can't we see the potential for a national green accommodation governing relationship? The answer to that is, well, the Green membership will vote it down. It's just not going to happen. Ben, but the Grand Coalition you think is that plausible?
I don't know, no. I mean, because you'd have to think, like, what's the counterfactual, you can only sort of imagine it if the party to either the left of Labour or the right of National was sort of so extremist and kind of insane that was totally unpalatable to the kind of, centre-right or centre-left voters that took you over the middle. So I can't really imagine.
It would be nice to see them working together more to solve important issues, though, like, climate change and housing and all of those big ones.
The Mandela Coalition.
There are some things. No, there are some things that should be non-partisan, that we should actually build a coalition across Parliament for. And climate change is an obvious one, but there are other issues as well. In a post-disaster environment, if we've learnt nothing from what happened here in Christchurch after the earthquakes, it's actually bringing parties together to work in a collaborative way. This radical collaboration is a phrase that's really taken off internationally, and it's something that we should learn from here. There are moments in time when parties should come together, not pull the country apart.
Kia ora.
Thank you. Got time for a couple more, I reckon.
Kia ora. In the current climate of disinformation and misinformation, I'm interested in your view on how healthy you think democracy is coming up to this election.
Yeah, well, there was a full session on that yesterday. Well, not quite on that, but there's a lot to be said. I mean, my view...
Were they yes or no?
What?
Good.
Well, I think it's real and live, and it can affect and infect things in ways that aren't simply whether or not people get into Parliament. So there's that. And some of it is being kind of absorbed into the New Zealand First Party, so there's that. At the same time, and this is absolutely not to encourage any complacency whatsoever, when you look at some examples overseas, I'm very grateful for what we do have here. You know, that's not at all to say that there aren't risks and that some of those are imported, those dangers, but I think to keep it in perspective, it's not at this point as though we're on the brink. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, I've expressed views already about the impact of social media and the disinformation that has been spread through it, and a lot has been imported. You know, I've gone to, or walked past a protest or been involved in a protest, and you see the signs, and they're exactly the same words that mean nothing here in New Zealand. You know, that might say defund the police. You know, like that's straight from America. That is not ours. So I think that it has a lot more influence, but I do think that the numbers are the minority. You know, like I do think that they're noisy and they sound like they're the majority, but they're not. But the amount of influence that they can have really does undermine democracy, which was the question that we were asked.
I do worry a little bit about, obviously we're not as bad as the US, although, you know, misinformation and disinformation, you know, especially during COVID, is a major problem. But it's not just that. Like I struggle to understand why media platforms spend so much money on polling. It's so incredibly expensive, and I talked to Moana Maniapoto about this the other day. You know, that's money that you could be spending on regional reporters who actually go out and report on what the real issues are rather than what, you know, someone was thinking about a certain policy last week. And I do think that they become self-fulfilling prophecies and they actually set the mood for how we all feel. And, you know, do they really add to the quality of our democracy? I don't think they do. So I think those are some of the things we should be thinking about as well. And also, you know, filling up our news cycle with, ironically, punditry and analysis is one thing, but when we're just like overwhelmed constantly by opinion pieces that encourage us to be very set in our positions and don't reach across the aisle, I worry about the effect that has on us as well. But not us.
Not us.
We're wonderful. If there was more of us, in fact, if there was only us, things would be great.
We could just work it out between us. Yeah. All right, one more question. I don't know where okay, it's the last one.
Okay, hopefully this is good. What election result on election night will make you look at the screen and think, well, that's just not going to work?
Well, what the polling doesn't suggest this at the moment, but there was a period of time where a series of polls, like at least 3 or 4, and the average of polls suggested a dead heat, which was basically 60 each. So you would have National and ACT with 60, Labour, the Greens and Te Pāti Māori on 60, which would, and I did what you do in those circumstances, is you ring up Andrew Geddes and say, what is it? And his suggestion was that most likely that would mean, and it's, you know, versions of those have happened in other similar electoral systems, that you'd end up with another election. You know, I mean, we've in a yeah, welcome. We'll be back in 6 months. But I mean, other jurisdictions have, it's reasonably common to have periods of time where you have like endless coalition negotiations. Don't know if they worked out in Spain yet. I mean, Brussels, Belgium had for ages. I don't know. Any results for you guys?
Our first MMP election, that went on for weeks.
Wasn't it 3 months, 12 weeks or something to negotiate that?
I can't remember exactly how long it went on for, but
it's quite a blissful period in a way. Like, well, you know. The
boss of us,
press
eh?
gallery are
No
reduced
one's a
to
boss.
writing about the biscuits they're eating while they wait in the lift well. Any other results that would shock, surprise, or you?
I think New Zealand first holding the balance of power will make it very hard for, Hipkins has ruled them out. They've ruled Hipkins out. That doesn't mean anything after the election. It's certainly, Active said they won't sit around a cabinet table with Peters. I think that would make it very difficult to get a stable government. If you meant, this won't work for me, I would particularly dislike that.
Hey, those were great questions. Thanks for that. It's a privilege to be in the company of such intelligent people.
People with great taste.
Yeah, well, that too. Yeah. Thank you very much for having us. Thank you to Karen and the whole team at Word Christchurch. Thanks to Te Ahi Butler, our producer, who's up there, keeping us calm. Thanks, Lianne. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Annabelle. Thank you. Ngā mihi nui.
Kia ora.
Talofa lover, I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.